people using a yield curve to try and judge where we are in the economic cycle. Do sectors say a different story?
Well, when you look at it both ways, if you kind of disentangle or go back, macro strategists at Bloomberg, Cameron Christ did this to try and disentangle where we outperform and what that says ex post about where we were in the economic cycle. And so far, he sees a lot of comparisons between the 90s and now in terms of early cycle and mid cycle. So your tech, your financial, your consumer discretionary have been the outperformers, whereas utes, materials, energy have kind of underperformed. And that's, a scenario that's a lot like the backdrop from the bull market of the 1990s. So yeah. I think it says that maybe the party isn't over when the yield curve inverts. I think we've seen that there's a lot left after yield curve inversions.
I've seen so many notes, and I'm sure you guys have as well, though, looking out into next year that basically say it's time to play the late cycle themes, it's time to play energy, it's time to play materials. Are you saying it's not time to get exposure to the late cycle themes?
Well, I think it's different this time, right? Like we've had.
That scares Tobias and I.
It's almost a historical, generational thing that we've had in oil with the shale revolution and the subsequent bust. We really haven't had anything or any parallel to that since like 85, 86 in terms of a supply side story. So in terms of overlaying narratives, overlaying a 90s narrative, overlaying a mid 80s narrative, I think it's difficult, especially when there's a lot of reasons to see why the cycle might extend, and there's not a lot of imbalances that we can visibly see that have built up right now.
So Tobias, a couple of moments ago we talked about the panic euphoria model that you guys look at Citi. Fold that into the view that actually we're not in a late cycle position.
So we got to make three quick points, okay?
Sure.
One is each cycle can be similar in terms of mid, early, late, but the drivers in those cycles could be different. So if it was the late 1990s, it was all about tech and dot-com land. And then we got into a super cycle in commodities, and what's the next cycle now? Synchronized global growth, whatever differential there is, isn't applicable necessarily to every sector. And you can't say, hey, let's do the carbon copy, although I just dated myself by even suggesting the word carbon copy. The other side of it, even if I said Xerox it or copy it, it would also be dating myself. Just
carry on, Tobias.
Okay.
Come on.
The second thing is that there have been elements of that flattening yield curve. Even if you go flat or invert, it's often about a year later that you see the economic problems, not at the time that you invert. So that's another piece of trying to figure out. And I always smile because when I was in school way back learning about economic cycles, late 1970s, early 80s, my college professors were telling us that the average cycle age was 4.5 years since the end of World War II. And then we went in the 80s and 90s with 9-year cycles, and we're in year 8 of this cycle. So cycles can extend, and trying to pinpoint where you are in a cycle is really challenging.
Luke?